In the harsh light of midday, a man was handcuffed in front of a crowd, accused of looking suspicious. But what the officers didn't know, what no one could have imagined, was that the black man they had just arrested wasn't just any ordinary individual. He was, in fact, a judge. The very next day, this same man would sit in judgment over the officers who had wrongfully detained him, shining a glaring light on a broken system that had failed them all. What unfolded next is beyond shocking, but let's rewind and begin at the start. In the lively heart of Silver Springs, Officers Bradley and Carter walked the bustling streets with an air of superiority, an arrogance that had become all too familiar to those who lived here. The locals had learned to whisper about the duo, knowing their reputation for targeting anyone they deemed suspicious, but rarely did anyone have the courage to stand up to them. On this particular day, their eyes fell upon a man they clearly deemed out of place: Martin Green. Martin, a middle-aged black man, stepped out of a sleek black sedan parked near City Hall, looking every bit the picture of professionalism and success. His crisp navy blue suit, with its neatly folded pocket square, and his polished leather shoes, all spoke of a life built on hard work. In his hand, he carried a well-worn briefcase, a silent testament to years of diligent service. His every step exuded confidence, a man with a clear purpose and direction in life. But to Officers Bradley and Carter, none of that mattered. To them, his composed, respectable appearance only stood out as a red flag. "Sir, stop right there," Bradley shouted, his hand hovering over his holstered weapon, his voice sharp with an assumed authority that reeked of prejudice. Martin stopped, turning slowly, a flicker of disbelief flashing across his face. With a calm yet firm demeanor, he asked, "Officers, is there a problem?" His voice steady, not a hint of fear, but more a quiet questioning that seemed to rattle them. "We've had reports of a vehicle matching yours involved in a theft nearby," Officer Carter added, his tone dripping with feigned concern. It was an accusation pulled from thin air, completely baseless. Yet, seeing Martin remain unfazed only seemed to provoke them further. With a raised eyebrow, Martin responded without hesitation, "That's a serious accusation. May I see the report?" Bradley's jaw clenched, irritation flickering in his eyes. "Hands where I can see them," he snapped. "You're under arrest for obstruction of justice." The escalation was swift, unnecessary, and completely unjustified. People who had been going about their day froze, watching in stunned silence as the officers aggressively moved to restrain Martin. Some pulled out their phones, capturing the moment, documenting the injustice as it unfolded. Martin remained calm, his actions measured as the cold metal cuffs clicked around his wrists. "You're making a grave mistake," he said quietly, his words firm but filled with the weight of truth. The officers responded with mocking laughter, completely oblivious to the storm they had just stirred up. Inside the precinct, Martin sat in a holding cell, his demeanor calm amid the chaos around him. Officers Bradley and Carter, emboldened by the false sense of power their badges gave them, took every opportunity to mock Martin's stoic silence. "Think he's some big shot?" Bradley sneered, drawing a chuckle from Carter. "Guess he thinks staying quiet makes him look innocent," Carter added with a smirk, clearly enjoying the situation. But Martin's silence only deepened the unease in the room, a powerful display of restraint that unnerved everyone. Requests for a phone call went unanswered, dismissed without even a second thought. Instead, they subjected him to hours of pointless questioning, more about asserting their control over him than actually uncovering any facts. Meanwhile, outside the precinct, the story was already beginning to spread. Videos of Martin's arrest, captured by bystanders, quickly went viral on social media, showing the blatant racial profiling, the false accusations, and the aggression displayed by the officers. Public outrage surged, with activists, community leaders, and concerned citizens all demanding accountability. News outlets debated the officers' motives, and hashtags like #Justice for Martin began trending. Bradley and Carter, however, remained blissfully unaware of the uproar outside. To them, Martin was just another arrest, a statistic. They didn't for a second consider the possibility that they had just detained a person of significant importance. Finally, in his holding cell, Martin broke his silence. His voice, calm yet firm, echoed as he spoke to the sergeant on duty. "I need to contact my office," he said. "I have court tomorrow." The sergeant smirked, leaning back in his chair. "Court? What, you planning to defend yourself in front of a judge?" He jeered, clearly underestimating Martin. But Martin's gaze remained unwavering as he replied simply, "No. I am the judge." A shocked silence followed his words. The sergeant quickly began frantically typing on his keyboard, his face turning pale as the truth appeared on the screen. Martin Green, Justice of the Peace, presiding judge at Silver Springs Municipal Court. The enormity of their mistake began to sink in, and panic rippled through the precinct. The storm they had unleashed was about to come crashing down on them. The next morning the courtroom was packed, buzzing with anticipation. Journalists elbowed their way in, cameras at the ready. The gallery was filled with community members, many of whom had watched the arrest unfold online, their faces filled with a mix of anger and curiosity. When Martin entered the room, dressed in his judicial robe, a hush fell over the crowd. His confident stride, his commanding presence, and the quiet authority in his eyes made it clear. He was no longer the man in cuffs. He was the man in charge. The officers who had arrested him, Bradley and Carter, entered soon after. Gone was their usual swagger, replaced by visible discomfort. Their faces were pale, their eyes darting nervously as they tried to avoid the harsh stares of the audience, and the piercing gaze of the man they had so recently humiliated. "Officers Bradley and Carter," Martin's voice rang out, firm and clear. "You stand accused of racial profiling, unlawful arrest, and abuse of power. Do you have anything to say in your defense?" The officers fumbled, their words stumbling over each other. They tried to justify their actions, offering weak excuses, claiming they were simply following protocol, acting on a report. But their defenses quickly crumbled as the evidence mounted. The viral videos of the arrest, witness testimonies, and Martin's impeccable record as a justice of the peace all painted a clear picture of injustice. Martin, with unwavering professionalism, conducted the proceedings. His resolve was unshakable. The irony of the situation was palpable. The officers had arrested a man on his way to meet the mayor about community reform, only for that very man to become the embodiment of the very issues he was working to address. The session ended with a swift verdict. Officers Bradley and Carter were suspended without pay, pending a full investigation into their actions. The scandal was no longer a matter for internal review. It had become a public outcry. The police chief, under immense pressure, issued a public apology, admitting that the department had failed, not just Martin Green but the entire community. Yet no apology could undo the damage done to the department's reputation, now seen by many as a symbol of systemic racism. For Martin, this ordeal marked a turning point, not just in his personal life, but for the community he had served. Instead of letting bitterness consume him, he channeled his pain into action. With a new platform and public support, he spearheaded reforms aimed at rebuilding trust between the police and the community. He worked tirelessly with local officials to develop training programs focused on eliminating racial bias, encouraging community engagement, and restoring faith in the justice system. The incident sparked protests across the city, with people of all races uniting in solidarity. What started as a moment of injustice evolved into a movement for change, inspiring statewide reforms and the creation of independent oversight committees to investigate police misconduct. Months later, as things began to settle, Martin stood on the steps of City Hall, a quiet moment of reflection. Below him, a new generation of police recruits, selected under the newly established reforms, walked into the academy. Their faces were filled with hope and determination, embodying a vision of law enforcement grounded in equity and respect. Martin allowed himself a small, cautious smile. The scars of past injustice would never fade completely, but he believed in the possibility of change. Though the fight for true justice was far from over, he knew that every step forward, no matter how small, was progress worth celebrating.